20. Black Hollywood stars, brutally judged for their looks. Hollywood loves to sell beauty as destiny, but for black artists, the truth has often been far more brutal. Long before awards, box office numbers, or cultural impact, many were judged the moment they walked into a room not by talent, but by faces that didn't fit a narrow, unspoken standard. Some were told they weren't marketable. Others were quietly sidelined. Yet they endured not because the system became fair, but because excellence refused to disappear. This is 20 Black Hollywood stars brutally judged for their looks. Stay with us to the end, because the final story reveals what Hollywood still doesn't want to admit. If you value truth over illusion, subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence and join the conversation. Whoopi Goldberg. Whoopi Goldberg has spent her entire career confronting one of Hollywood's most uncomfortable contradictions. Talent can be celebrated, yet appearance can still be weaponized. From the moment she broke into mainstream entertainment in the 1980s, Goldberg was labeled as unconventional, a coded term that often meant she did not fit the industry's narrow beauty expectations for black women. Studios rarely framed her as glamorous or desirable despite her undeniable screen presence and razor-sharp intelligence. What makes Goldberg's journey remarkable is that her success was never built on visual approval. She commanded attention through voice timing, emotional authority, and fearless honesty. In 1991, she won the Academy Award for Ghost, becoming one of the few black women in history to achieve Hollywood's highest acting honor. Yet even after that milestone, she was still excluded from traditional leading lady narratives and beauty-driven marketing campaigns. Her face was accepted only when detached from fantasy. Here's the question audiences should pause on if an Oscar couldn't protect her from appearance-based judgment. What chance did others have? Goldberg's endurance exposes how deeply ingrained aesthetic bias is in American entertainment. She never chased cosmetic reinvention or public validation. Instead, she built longevity across film, television, stage, and cultural commentary, earning EGOT status, an achievement reached by fewer than 20 artists in history. Her legacy proves a hard truth. Hollywood didn't evolve for Whoopi Goldberg. She forced it to make room. And in doing so, she redefined what power looks like when beauty standards fail. Forest Whitaker. Forest Whitaker has long embodied a truth. Hollywood rarely admits emotional authority can matter more than visual symmetry. Early in his career, casting agents quietly questioned his appearance, focusing on facial asymmetry caused by ptosis rather than the depth he brought to every role. In an industry obsessed with polished faces, Whitaker was often seen as difficult to market, even as his performances consistently stood out. Instead of being framed as a conventional leading man, Whitaker was pushed toward complex, wounded, or morally conflicted characters. Yet that perceived limitation became his greatest strength. His face carried stillness, pain, and gravity qualities that made audiences believe him instantly. Over time, directors recognized that his presence could anchor an entire film without relying on charm or physical idealism. That recognition culminated in his Academy Award win in 2007 for The Last King of Scotland, a role defined by psychological intensity rather than appearance. Even after global acclaim, Whitaker was never repositioned as traditionally attractive or aspirational. He remained categorized as serious, a label often reserved for actors deemed visually unconventional. Beyond acting, his humanitarian work and directing further reinforced his credibility, expanding his influence far beyond the screen. Forest Whitaker's career proves that Hollywood may tolerate difference, but it rarely celebrates it. His legacy stands as evidence that truth, restraint, and emotional honesty can outlast any superficial judgment, no cosmetic correction required. Michael K. Williams. Michael K. Williams carried a face that Hollywood never knew how to soften, and that refusal to soften became his power. A deep facial scar, the result of an assault in his early 20s, permanently shaped how the industry viewed him. Casting rooms often saw danger before depth, assuming his appearance limited him to criminal or intimidating roles. In many systems, that scar would have closed doors. In Williams' case, it became an unspoken resume. Rather than being erased or concealed, his face communicated lived experience. It felt earned. When he broke through in television and film, audiences responded not to polish, but to authenticity. His performances conveyed vulnerability beneath hardness, a balance Hollywood rarely allows black men to display. The industry often tried to confine him to stereotypes, yet Williams consistently expanded them from the inside, making even brief appearances unforgettable. If that scar had never existed, would his performances have felt as real or simply more acceptable? Williams' most celebrated roles were never about likability. They were about truth. His eyes carried sorrow, restraint, and moral conflict that no makeup department could manufacture. Over a career spanning more than 2 decades, he earned critical acclaim, multiple award nominations, and the respect of peers who recognized that his presence elevated everything around him. Michael K. Williams didn't succeed despite being judged for his looks. He exposed how shallow that judgment was by outlasting it. Steve Harvey. Steve Harvey entered Hollywood carrying a burden that rarely gets discussed openly. He was judged long before he was heard. Early in his career, Harvey was routinely dismissed for his appearance. His build, facial features, and overall presentation did not align with the polished, youthful image television executives preferred. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, when sitcom leads were expected to be visually safe and broadly appealing, Harvey was often told he looked too old, too rough, or simply not right for TV. Instead of chasing approval, he leaned into what could not be ignored, his voice timing and command of an audience. Stand-up comedy became his proving ground where looks mattered far less than truth and connection. When The Steve Harvey Show finally reached network television in 1996, it wasn't because Hollywood suddenly found him attractive. It was because viewers had already chosen him. Ratings forced executives to adjust, not the other way around. Even after becoming a household name, Harvey's appearance remained a punchline in media commentary. Yet his career expanded radio books, daytime television, and Family Feud, building an empire measured in decades, not trends. Steve Harvey's journey exposes a quiet reality. Hollywood often tolerates unconventional looks only after undeniable success. His longevity proves that confidence, authority, and cultural resonance can outgrow any first impression rooted in shallow judgment. Jay-Z. Jay-Z entered the public eye at a time when hip-hop success was increasingly tied to image, not just lyricism. From the late 1990s onward, he was frequently mocked in media and pop culture for his facial features labeled unattractive despite his rising dominance in music. Unlike many artists pushed to fit a visual mold, Jay-Z was never marketed as a heartthrob. His presence challenged an unspoken rule: black male stars were expected to balance success with a certain kind of physical appeal. Rather than correcting or disguising his appearance, Jay-Z made it irrelevant. He positioned himself as a strategist, storyteller, and executive, shifting attention from looks to power. By the mid-2000s, his albums had gone multi-platinum, and his influence extended far beyond music into business, sports, and culture. Still, commentary about his face persisted, often resurfacing even as his achievements grew undeniable. Why did Hollywood and the media cling to his appearance when his success metrics were impossible to dispute? Today, Jay-Z's legacy is measured in data, not aesthetics. Over 2 decades at the top, historic sales figures, and a business empire valued in the billions. His career exposes a hard truth for black men. Wealth and influence may silence critics, but they rarely erase appearance-based judgment. Jay-Z didn't change Hollywood's beauty standards. He bypassed them entirely and made them look small in the process. Seal. Seal entered global stardom carrying a face the industry didn't know how to frame. His distinctive facial scars, caused by complications from lupus in his youth, became an immediate focal point for media coverage, often overshadowing his voice. In a business that privileges smoothness and symmetry, Seal was frequently discussed as an exception rather than an ideal. a framing that quietly reinforced how rigid beauty standards could be, especially for black artists, crossing into mainstream pop. Yet his talent refused to be sidelined. When his breakthrough singles reached international charts in the early 1990s, audiences connected to something deeper than image, a voice marked by warmth, vulnerability, and emotional control. His music wasn't marketed on looks, it traveled on resonance. Over time, he earned multiple Grammy Awards and sustained a career spanning decades, measurable achievements that required no cosmetic correction or visual rebranding. Seal's career reveals a subtle cruelty in entertainment culture. Difference is often treated as a distraction before it's accepted as identity. Rather than conceal what made him stand out, he allowed it to coexist with excellence. In doing so, he challenged the idea that visual comfort is a prerequisite for musical credibility. His success stands as evidence that authenticity can outlast scrutiny, and that true artistry doesn't need permission to be heard. Bernie Mac. Bernie Mac was never welcomed into Hollywood through the front door of visual approval. From the start, his appearance, tall frame, expressive face, and unapologetically rough edges was treated as incompatible with the industry's polished expectations. Executives often saw him as too loud, too raw, and too unconventional to lead mainstream projects, especially in an era when black comedians were expected to appear safe, smiling, and non-threatening. What Hollywood underestimated was how powerfully audiences respond to honesty. Bernie Mac didn't soften his image or recalibrate his delivery. He leaned into truth drawn from real-life family struggle, frustration, and survival. His comedy carried authority because it felt lived in, not manufactured. When he transitioned to television with The Bernie Mac Show in 2001, the success wasn't driven by image, it was driven by credibility. Viewers recognized something rare, a man who looked and sounded like someone they actually knew. If Bernie Mac had been more presentable by Hollywood standards, would his voice have carried the same weight? Even at the height of his fame, Bernie Mac was rarely framed as aspirational or glamorous. Yet his influence grew because he delivered something beauty never could trust. His performances in film and television proved that authority doesn't come from appearance but from conviction. Bernie Mac's legacy exposes a quiet truth. Hollywood may hesitate to embrace faces that challenge comfort, but audiences never forget them when they speak the truth without apology. Tracy Morgan. Tracy Morgan built his career in a system that rarely knew how to value someone who didn't fit its visual comfort zone. From his earliest appearances, Morgan's face voice and physical presence were treated as punchlines before his talent was fully acknowledged. Industry gatekeepers often reduced him to caricature, assuming his look made him suitable only for exaggerated humor rather than layered storytelling or long-term credibility. What separated Morgan from many of his peers was his refusal to sanitize himself. He didn't smooth his edges or mute his intensity to appear more acceptable. Instead, he leaned into a style that felt chaotic, unpredictable, and deeply human. On Saturday Night Live and later 30 Rock, his presence stood out precisely because it resisted polish. His humor carried traces of vulnerability, survival, and lived experience that couldn't be rehearsed into existence. Even after career-defining success, commentary around Morgan often circled back to his appearance rather than his craft. That pattern revealed a familiar bias: when a black performer doesn't match aesthetic expectations, their depth is frequently overlooked. Morgan's life-altering accident in 2014 further reshaped public perception, but his return reinforced a core truth: resilience is not cosmetic. Tracy Morgan's career proves that authenticity can endure mockery, outlast stereotypes, and command space long after surface judgment loses relevance. Danny Glover. Danny Glover entered Hollywood with a presence that challenged the industry's narrow expectations of leading men. Early on, casting executives often framed him as too serious or too old-looking, even when he was still relatively young. His facial structure, measured delivery, and calm authority didn't align with the youthful, photogenic image studios preferred to market, especially for black actors, expected to project either charm or menace, nothing in between. Rather than being positioned as a romantic ideal, Glover was frequently cast as the conscience of a story, the principled partner, the weary protector, the man carrying moral weight. That distinction mattered. Hollywood respected his reliability, but rarely celebrated his appearance, subtly reinforcing the idea that certain faces were meant to support narratives, not headline fantasies. Yet audiences responded to something deeper: trust. His performances felt grounded, humane, and credible across genres. If Danny Glover had fit Hollywood's beauty template, would his authority have been taken as seriously? Over a career spanning more than 4 decades, Glover built longevity through consistency and integrity, not visual approval. He expanded his impact beyond acting into activism and advocacy, further distancing his value from aesthetics alone. Danny Glover's legacy exposes a quiet bias. Hollywood may sideline faces it can't easily market, but it ultimately depends on performers whose presence feels real. In the long run, authenticity proved more durable than appearance. Samuel L. Jackson. Samuel L. Jackson spent years moving through Hollywood without fitting any version of its beauty ideal. Early in his career, he was rarely described as charismatic or visually appealing. Instead, he was often labeled intense, abrasive, or too sharp-coded language that quietly dismissed his appearance while overlooking his discipline and range. For a long time, Jackson was cast in small, forgettable roles, not because he lacked ability, but because the industry didn't know how to sell his face. What changed was not how he looked, but how impossible he became to ignore. His voice precision and commanding presence reframed the conversation. When breakthrough roles finally arrived, they were fueled by authority and control, not physical allure. Jackson's face carried conviction, intelligence, and danger qualities Hollywood typically reserves for characters not stars. Yet audiences responded instantly, trusting him in every genre from drama to action. Even after becoming one of the highest-grossing actors in film history, commentary around his appearance never fully disappeared. He was celebrated for power, not beauty. That distinction matters. Jackson's career proves that Hollywood often separates admiration from desirability, especially for black men. His longevity, spanning more than 150 films, demonstrates a measurable truth presence outlasts polish. Samuel L. Jackson didn't change to fit Hollywood. Hollywood adjusted because he refused to fade. Ving Rhames. Ving Rhames entered Hollywood carrying a physical presence that the industry found useful, but rarely nuanced. His powerful build, deep voice, and intimidating facial features quickly placed him into a narrow visual category. Casting decisions often assumed strength before complexity, treating his appearance as a shortcut for authority, danger, or dominance. While this opened doors, it also quietly limited the range Hollywood believed he could inhabit. Rather than being shaped into a romantic lead or a visually aspirational figure, Rhames was positioned as force. His characters didn't need introductions. His face communicated command instantly. Yet behind that exterior was a performer capable of restraint, loyalty, and moral depth. Audiences sensed it even when scripts failed to explore it fully. Over time, his consistency turned familiarity into trust, allowing him to anchor long-running franchises and serious dramatic roles without ever being sold on looks. Did Hollywood rely on Ving Rhames' appearance to avoid writing him with greater emotional complexity? Despite decades of success, Rhames was rarely reframed outside his visual stereotype. His achievements were measured in endurance rather than praise. Still, that endurance matters. He built a career spanning more than 30 years by owning his presence instead of apologizing for it. Ving Rhames' story reveals a subtle bias. Hollywood may reward strength in black men, but it often hesitates to imagine them as anything beyond it. Spike Lee. Spike Lee has spent his entire career challenging Hollywood's comfort not only through his films, but through his presence. From the moment he emerged in the late 1980s, Lee was never treated as a visually acceptable public figure by mainstream standards. Media coverage often fixated on his appearance, style, and demeanor, framing him as confrontational or abrasive rather than examining the substance of his work. His face became shorthand for disruption in an industry that prefers its power figures to look neutral and non-threatening. Unlike many filmmakers who remain behind the curtain, Lee stood at the center of his art. He appeared in his own films, spoke directly to the press, and refused to soften his image for broader approval. That visibility made him a target. His looks, voice, and body language were routinely criticized as part of a larger attempt to delegitimize his authority. Instead of being discussed as a visionary, he was often reduced to tone and attitude. Over 4 decades, Lee built a career defined by consistency, influence, and cultural impact. His films are studied, debated, and preserved, while the criticism of his appearance has aged poorly. Spike Lee's legacy exposes a clear truth: when Hollywood cannot control the message, it often attacks the messenger. He endured not by fitting in, but by refusing to disappear. Rick Ross. Rick Ross entered the Hollywood-adjacent spotlight carrying a body and face that were relentlessly scrutinized. From the start, media commentary fixated on his weight, beard, and overall appearance, often framing him as a punchline rather than a power broker. In an industry that quietly rewards sleekness and punishes deviation, Ross was labeled unmarketable on sight, even as his music climbed charts and his influence expanded beyond rap into business and culture. Instead of shrinking himself to meet expectations, Ross reframed the narrative. He leaned into presence, authority, and ambition, projecting an image of control that did not rely on physical conformity. His look became inseparable from his brand, unapologetic, immovable, and grounded in success rather than approval. Still, ridicule persisted, especially in mainstream entertainment spaces, where black male bodies are often policed more harshly than their white counterparts. If Rick Ross had fit a Hollywood's preferred body type, would critics have focused less on his appearance and more on his accomplishments? Over time, measurable achievements drowned out surface judgment: multiple platinum albums, a successful label, and a lasting cultural footprint. Yet the scrutiny never fully vanished, revealing a deeper bias at work. Rick Ross's career proves that power can coexist with prejudice. Hollywood may mock what it can't mold, but it cannot erase success built on consistency, vision, and self-definition. Lil Wayne. Lil Wayne rose to fame under a microscope that rarely separated talent from appearance. As his influence expanded in the early 2000s, commentary about his face hair tattoos and stature grew louder, often overshadowing discussion of his craft. In mainstream entertainment spaces, he was frequently framed as visually unappealing, a label that reflected discomfort with difference more than any objective standard. His look didn't align with Hollywood's preference for clean lines and controlled presentation, especially for black male stars crossing into mass media. Rather than dilute his identity, Wayne doubled down on it. His image became unapologetically personal. Visible scars, face tattoos, and a posture that signaled independence rather than approval-seeking. That choice unsettled an industry accustomed to reshaping artists for comfort. Yet audiences responded to authenticity. His music dominated charts, reshaped lyrical styles, and influenced an entire generation of performers, forcing Hollywood to engage with him on his terms. Even at the height of success, scrutiny of his appearance never fully faded. Praise came with qualifiers, admiration with judgment. Wayne's longevity, spanning decades, records, and cultural shifts, demonstrates a measurable truth. Relevance is not built on polish. Lil Wayne didn't conform to Hollywood's image economy. He exposed its limits by thriving outside it. Method Man. Method Man entered Hollywood carrying a look that industry executives often struggled to categorize. With sharp features, a raw street presence, and an unapologetically rugged style, he didn't fit the polished or safe image typically expected of crossover stars. Early on, his appearance was frequently framed as intimidating or too aggressive, limiting how casting rooms initially viewed his potential beyond music. Instead of reshaping himself, Method Man leaned into credibility. His face carried authenticity, someone who looked like he came from real places and real experiences, not a manufactured image. That realism translated powerfully on screen. When he transitioned into acting, audiences believed him immediately, not because he looked aspirational, but because he looked honest. Hollywood often values black male performers for edge, while withholding vulnerability, yet Method Man consistently balanced both. If his look had been smoother and more conventional, would his performances have felt as grounded or simply more marketable? Over time, his consistency broke down skepticism. He built a respected acting resume, alongside a legendary music career, proving range without sacrificing identity. Still, mainstream commentary rarely framed him as visually desirable, reinforcing the unspoken rule that certain faces are allowed credibility, but not admiration. Method Man's career exposes that divide clearly. He didn't succeed by fitting Hollywood's aesthetic mold, he succeeded by making authenticity impossible to ignore. Nas emerged at a moment when hip-hop visibility was expanding, yet Hollywood's comfort with black male appearance remained narrow. From the start, media commentary often fixated on his face quiet, unsmiling, unconcerned with spectacle, reading it as aloof or unfriendly rather than intentional. He wasn't styled as a heartthrob or pushed as a visual icon. Instead, he was framed as serious to the point of severity, a subtle judgment that followed him as his influence grew. Nas never chased approval through image. His posture, dress, and presence communicated focus, not invitation. That restraint confused an entertainment culture trained to equate charisma with constant accessibility. While peers were encouraged to exaggerate persona, Nas leaned into interiority, letting lyrics' cadence and narrative weight carry the connection. Audiences recognized the difference immediately. Across decades, his credibility became measurable, enduring catalog sales, critical acclaim, and cultural reverence that outlasted trends. Yet the early appearance-based framing never fully vanished, revealing how quickly seriousness in black men is misread as deficiency. Nas' career proves a lasting point. Impact doesn't require visual reassurance. By refusing to perform likability, he expanded what authority could look like, forcing Hollywood to meet the work where it stood, rather than reshaping the artist to fit its comfort. Erykah Badu. Erykah Badu has spent her career confronting a version of Hollywood judgment that rarely tolerates autonomy, especially in black women. From her earliest success in the late 1990s, her appearance was labeled strange, unpolished, or too unconventional, language that masked discomfort with a woman who refused visual obedience. Head wraps, natural hair, and fluid presentation challenged an industry that prefers black femininity to be easily packaged and consistently legible. Badu never corrected the narrative. She made it irrelevant. Her image shifted across eras, sometimes regal, sometimes abstract, sometimes deliberately unsettling, always on her own terms. Rather than being framed as glamorous, she was often treated as an outlier, admired but distanced. Media conversations drifted toward how she looked or what she wore instead of what her music achieved, even as her work shaped an entire generation of neo-soul and beyond. When a black woman controls her image completely, why does the industry label that freedom as odd instead of powerful? Over nearly 3 decades, Badu's influence has remained measurable. Critically acclaimed albums, sold-out tours, and cultural relevance that transcends trends. The scrutiny never disappeared. It simply followed her evolution. Erykah Badu's career reveals a persistent bias. Originality is celebrated only when it doesn't threaten control. By refusing containment, she expanded what visibility could mean, proving that authenticity doesn't need validation to endure. Lizzo. Lizzo entered mainstream stardom under a level of appearance-based scrutiny few contemporary artists have faced. From the outset, her body size, clothing choices, and visibility were dissected more aggressively than her musicianship. In an industry that still equates thinness with marketability, especially for black women, Lizzo was framed as a provocation rather than a performer, her presence treated as a debate before it was allowed to be art. What's often overlooked is how measurable her success has been. Multiple chart-topping singles, major awards, and sold-out tours did not quiet the commentary. They intensified it. Praise frequently arrived with qualifiers, while criticism focused on whether her look should be allowed on major stages. Instead of retreating, Lizzo confronted the bias head-on, insisting that confidence and joy were not conditional on body conformity. Her visibility forced conversations Hollywood had long avoided. Even as she emphasized musicianship, wellness, and performance discipline, the industry struggled to separate excellence from aesthetics. That tension reveals a deeper truth about cultural gatekeeping. Success doesn't automatically dismantle beauty standards, it exposes them. Lizzo's impact lies not only in her music, but in how she challenged who gets to be seen without apology. Her career underscores a lasting lesson for audiences raised on old rules. Authenticity can be celebrated, but it is still tested hardest when it refuses to look familiar. Donald Rawlings. Donald Rawlings built his career in a corner of Hollywood where appearance is often used as shorthand for value. From early stand-up stages to mainstream television, Rawlings was frequently framed as visually rough, a label that quietly limited how executives imagined his range. His face, voice, and physicality were often treated as tools for punchlines, rather than as assets for layered storytelling, reinforcing a familiar pattern where black comedians are boxed before they're understood. Rather than polishing himself for acceptance, Rawlings leaned into realism. His humor carried sharp social observation, frustration, and honesty rooted in lived experience. On Chappelle's show, his presence stood out not because he looked safe, but because he looked real. Someone audiences recognized instantly. That recognition came with a cost. While his work resonated strongly with viewers, Hollywood hesitated to elevate him beyond supporting roles, often citing market concerns that masked aesthetic bias. When laughter connects this deeply, why does appearance still decide who gets promoted and who gets parked? Over decades, Rawlings sustained relevance through stand-up television and cultural commentary without ever being rebranded for comfort. His career reveals a quiet contradiction. Hollywood depends on authenticity, but rarely rewards it fully when it doesn't fit visual expectations. Donald Rawlings didn't fail to break through. He exposed how narrow the gate really is. His longevity proves that credibility with audiences can endure even when the industry refuses to widen its lens. Wesley Snipes. Wesley Snipes rose to stardom during an era when Hollywood demanded black male leads be both physically dominant and visually controlled. Despite his athletic build and screen charisma, Snipes was frequently judged through a narrow lens. His intense gaze, sharp features, and uncompromising presence were labeled too aggressive or hard to soften for certain mainstream roles. That framing reduced a versatile performer to a set of visual assumptions before his range could be fully explored. Rather than dilute his image, Snipes leaned into discipline and precision. Trained in martial arts and grounded in classical performance, he brought rigor to every role, transforming action cinema while maintaining dramatic credibility. His success in the 1990s proved audiences would follow authority and conviction over cosmetic reassurance. Yet, even at the height of popularity, commentary around his look persisted, often resurfacing when narratives shifted away from his work. Across decades, Snipes' influence remains measurable, genre-defining performances, box office impact, and a legacy of physical commitment that reshaped expectations. His career reveals a recurring bias: Hollywood accepts power, but only when it feels controllable. Wesley Snipes didn't become enduring by chasing comfort. He did it by insisting that focus, preparation, and presence were enough, no aesthetic permission required. Hollywood often claims it has evolved, yet the stories you've just witnessed tell a more uncomfortable truth. These black artists were rarely judged by talent first, but by faces, bodies, and appearances that challenged a narrow, unforgiving standard. Some survived the ridicule. Others were delayed, boxed in, or underestimated for years before recognition arrived. Their success didn't erase bias, it exposed it. At Legends of Black Excellence, we don't just celebrate achievements, we confront the hidden cost behind them. So here's the real question for you. Has Hollywood genuinely changed its standards, or has it simply learned to disguise the same old judgments in more acceptable language?